Okay, and let's
Okay.
see.
I will call the meeting to order for our Watershed Committee meeting here on the 16th of September. And we can do a roll call.
Yes. Director Gibson,
Here.
Director Russell,
Here.
and Vice Chair Schmidt.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, a motion to adopt the agenda.
Move approval to adopt the agenda. Second.
Okay, and then do we
Second.
have any comments, public comments on the agenda, on things that are not on the agenda?
For the agenda, no, there aren't any for the adopting of the agenda. So let me do the roll, but then I'll go to the regular public comment after.
Okay,
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
and Vice Chair Schmidt.
Aye.
Okay, and then let me see if there are any public comments. Yes, there are a couple. Let me just double check with Roger Roberts. Mr. Roberts, sir, did you have a comment?
Yes, and forgive me for taking your time with this at this point. We're all concerned about wildfire. And it's my understanding that the last wildfire that really had massive effects on the watershed for the water district was in 1945. And you have a budget of about $2 million a year to try to deal with the watershed. And that's a pittance in comparison with the need. I suspect that if you had $40 million, you might be able to make a dent on fuel load and other vegetation management issues. But you don't. So I've been thinking about the question of how to protect the reservoirs in the event of wildfire. And I would like to suggest that maybe a feasibility study would be appropriate to see what it would cost to create a buffer to protect against wildfire damage to the watershed around the reservoirs. And so I'm just making that as a suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you. I have two additional public comments. Mr. Rick Adler, then the last four digits 8800. Go ahead, Mr. Adler.
Am I
Mr.
unmuted?
Adler, you're unmuted, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I would like to make a suggestion for obtaining more water, but I only got 3 minutes, so I'll go pretty fast. The Marin Water is operating under the principle that this is a temporary drought, that the rains are going to return. I suggest not, that this drought is the new climate, and it extends from Mexico to British Columbia, east to the Rocky Mountains. And when we don't get rain here, there's no rain anywhere. So chasing after water from our neighbors is a pipe dream. Chasing a mirage in the desert, it's just going to get hotter and drier and more fires. So we need to look for new sources of water. And one of the new sources is fog, the fog that rolls in over the Marin Hills every day, all summer, and a lot of the other times of the year too. And that fog can be tapped for water. It's been done in other places in the world. And the way you do it is you put up a screen, a stainless steel screen, kind of like a cyclone fence at the top of the ridges that the fog blows over. And the screen catches the water and it drips into a trough at the bottom of the fence. It goes into a tank and goes on to a bigger tank and can be used. It's very pure water. And so I suggest that this committee survey the Marin watershed for the highest ridges with the most fog, and then go to one of the companies that sells these screens and ask them if they want to put up a temporary test fence, see how much water you can get. And they probably will do it because if they can prove there's a lot of water, maybe they'll get a contract to build a lot of fence. And what if you could get a gallon of water a day from a foot of fence? We probably got 3 miles of ridge line that catches the fog, 15,000 feet, 15,000 gallons a day of water, additional water, new water. That's just in Marin. That would come every year during every drought, during this new climate. So I would suggest that you might begin to explore that because eventually you'll have to do that. Eventually we'll have to do desal and we'll have to do fog. It's the only other sources of water available to us, even with the best of.
Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Adler. Go ahead, finish one last sentence, and then I have to shut you off for a minute.
Okay, too bad. We should do another 3 minutes. I could have got us some other ideas. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Okay. 8800, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good. Nancy Okada. I just wanted to point out that this morning on KCBS at the 9 o'clock hour and maybe at other hours, there was a report that said that you had approved cutting the water by 75%, water usage by 75% for the you ratepayers. And if you listen to the story, then you actually got other information as well, which was that if you don't proceed at warp speed with building the pipeline, there was no mention of conservation, that in fact, water use was going to have to be cut to 75% because people aren't doing their job, et cetera, et cetera. They didn't mention conservation. They didn't mention any conservation efforts at all, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, your public information officer needs to be a little more careful about what they say. As well as I heard today about a senior complex where the water, the lawns are nice and green and everything is, you know, the fountains are running and everything else. So people are not really getting the message that this is a serious situation. And I hope your people who've gone out to the restaurants are continuing to try and encourage people to save, as well as just because we may get rain on Saturday does not mean that people can turn on their taps again. And going into the winter, people need to be reminded as well on conservation. So please step up your efforts on boosting conservation and no new water hookups. I mean, this is crazy. So thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you. There are no further comments.
Okay, great. Then we'll move on forward with the agenda and to adopt the minutes from our last watershed meeting. Can I get a motion to adopt the previous minutes?
Motion to approve the minutes. Second.
Okay, thank you. Are there any comments, public comments?
Not on this.
Okay.
So Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
and Vice Chair Schmidt.
Aye. Okay, moving on to our next agenda item, which is the 2021 Annual Vegetation Management Report. I think, Sean, are you leading it, or Carl?
Yeah, we're gonna have Carl present this one.
Okay, great.
Good afternoon, everyone. I have a PowerPoint presentation for you that I will review and discuss for yourself that covers our 2021 annual report. One moment. Okay, this is year 2 of our BIFIP implementation. So this is part of the BIFIP, which is to produce an annual report. And this takes us up through the end of June 2021. Outline of what we'll be discussing this afternoon or reviewing our vegetation and wildlife coordination efforts, our ongoing environmental compliance and monitoring efforts. We'll review select vegetation management actions, which is the on-the-ground work that we conduct. I'll review our management costs and the cost per acre and overall costs. Excuse me, and I'll finalize with a summary of what we accomplished and where we intend to go. Just a quick overview of the BIFIP adopted in 2019, our biodiversity, fire, and fuels integrated plan, which focuses on the actions the district's going to take to implement and reduce hazards and maintain ecosystem functions. We have 3 primary goals under which we work, one of which, the first of which is to minimize the risk from wildfire, the second, to preserve and enhance our biological resources, and the third, provide an adaptive framework for periodic reviews and revisions. The management actions are the, again, on-the-ground work that we conduct that includes the monitoring, inventorying, and planning, as well as the vegetation management actions that see work on the ground. And then, of course, the annual reporting, which is what we're reviewing now. Here's an overall map of work, some of the work that we conducted last year. This work does not include the weed work per se, but focuses on 3 primary areas: the forest health, fire prevention, as well as our coordination with utility and facility areas. As the map shows, you'll see that most of this work is conducted on Mount Tamalpais proper within the Lagunitas Creek watershed. Top of the slide shows us the year 2 target, which is 1,216 acres. We implemented 986 of those acres. On a later slide, I'll discuss the difference between those 2 numbers. Starting with coordination and planning. Throughout the fire season, we coordinate with county fire and state parks on red flag warnings and closures. Of note, we had 29 red flag closures last season. County fire coordination. We're working now with Marin County Fire and a renowned fire ecologist and consultant on putting together prescribed fire plans for potential burn units on Mount Tamalpais. Ongoing participation with Fire Safe Marin, and ongoing Sawyer training. The photo to the right is Marin County Fire seasonals, I think of which we had 60 this year that we helped conduct a fire or Sawyer training for them up on West Ridgecrest. Ongoing, again, throughout the year, coordination with PG&E on their distribution and transmission maintenance of both the vegetation as well as the actual facilities themselves. Then coordination with our various leases, including American Towers, West Point Inn, Marin Stables, on their own defensible space requirements. Ongoing annual monitoring and inventories that we conduct. Osprey monitoring, we've been doing this for almost a couple decades now. Continued slow decline. No bald eagles noted this year. The decline, the estimated decline is just they may be relocating to other North Bay locations. Continued seeps and springs monitoring, focusing on Potrero Meadows, where we've been conducting forestry work, as well as ongoing forest resilient monitoring on some of our initial pilot study areas. Most of these are on Bolinas Ridge or nearby. Yellow-legged frog monitoring, again, ongoing multi-year effort, shows a stable population of yellow-legged frogs in both the Little and Big Carson drainages. Continued non-native invasive plant monitoring, primarily with our one-TAM EDDR partners, which is early detection, rapid response. Rare plant monitoring, this occurs during our rare plant surveys, as well as with our own staff, with which we can update specific instance within our GIS records. And this year we've initiated soil pathogen studies within some of our proposed forestry units that we've looked at to see what may be affecting the various trees in these units. And then that provides us, and that also provided us with a new updated BMP list for our equipment and our operations and how we train our staff and contractors. Which brings me to segue to the next slide on environmental compliance. We conduct crew training for our contractors and staff on all new projects related to BIFIP compliance and mitigation measures. For our projects, we conduct pre-project hydrology, geology, biology, and cultural evaluations as needed. Ongoing northern spotted owl surveys, which show a stable population over the last 20 or so years. Pre-vegetation management nesting bird surveys. That takes quite a bit of time as we, especially during bird season, which lasts January through, in theory, through September. We conduct surveys that provide us avoidance buffers for crews conducting work. Similarly, we do that with roosting bat surveys on suitable habitat to, again, avoid impacts through avoidance measures. And we conduct rare plant surveys as well on specific work units to, again, provide us with avoidance measures for our crews conducting work. I'll now take you through some of the specific the specific management actions that we conduct and give you some costs and acreage that we completed. Fuel break maintenance, which includes our primary and secondary fuel breaks along and around the watershed, 171 acres we completed last year at a cost of $330,000. Broom management within fuel breaks. Did I miss a slide there? One moment. I'm sorry, I skipped a slide. Defensible space and fine fuel reduction. Defensible space being around structures and facilities, and fine fuels being our annual grasses. You can see an example in this photo there. We completed about 39 acres at a cost of $19,000. Broom management within our fuel breaks, 180 acres at a cost of about $85,000. Of note, we did another goat grazing trial. This year was on Upper Shaver Grade in Deer Park, where we brought in a herd of 400 goats to graze mature broom, and we're still assessing the results of that project. Roadside mowing, we completed 48 acres this year at a cost of $175,000. These two shots are, Deer Park and Concrete Pipe vicinity. This allows for emergency access and egress, as well as our own facility needs and use by our visiting public. Dam maintenance, we conduct this type of work every year. This is required by the State Division of Dam Safety. We're primarily interested in mowing down woody vegetation that could grow on, or that may be growing on our earthen dams. So that could be shrubs or trees, trying to keep the roots from impacting or having a negative impact on the dam. That's about 40 acres at a cost of $22,000. Our most expensive vegetation work is conducting new fuel breaks. Last year we conducted around 3 acres at a cost of $47,000. As you can see from the photos, it's extremely dense and extremely steep, which leads to these costs, and it's all done by hand labor. This work happened to be in Fern Canyon, which is above Mill Valley on the south side of the mountain, tying into fuel break work that was initially planned and conducted for the 1994 Mount Tam plan. As mentioned earlier, we continue to collaborate with our One Tam partners on early detection rapid response, where they're helping us to map and treat priority weeds. Last year, they completed 213 patches. These are most often priority weeds within annual grasslands. For the BIFIP, we're continuing to ramp up our forest work and fuel reduction work. Last year, we completed 57 acres of work, both at Pine Point and Rock Spring areas. at a cost of almost $300,000. And then, of course, we need to go back and maintain sites we worked on previously. We maintained about 31 acres last year at a cost of about $100,000. Of note are the two slides maybe down on the lower right, good before and after of work we conducted near the Rock Spring parking lot, directly adjacent to the Mountain Theater. The slide to the left, or the photo on the left, you can see the dense understory of Doug fir and dead and dying tan oak. You know, from a fire perspective, this is an abundance of ground and ladder fuels. The photo on the right shows the product afterwards, where we've thinned and reduced that continuity of fuels, as they say, with the objective being that if we have a fire that runs through this area, it's going to have a lower flame intensity and the forest should be more resilient because it won't be as impacted by the flame front as it would have been in the, let's say, the first slide. The picture to the far left is of Pine Point, so a little closer to home. Pine Point is the peninsula that juts out into Bontempi Reservoir. Continued work on our Doug fir encroachment into oak woodlands and grasslands. These two photos just show work we completed up on West Ridgecrest, where we're trying to retain our grassland habitat. And last year we completed about 100 acres at a cost of $181,000. Broom removal outside of fuel breaks. Initial broom removal is handwork. It's all manual pulling. You can see the photo on the left where they're using a weed wrench to manually extract that broom. 44 acres last year completed at a cost of almost $67,000. And of course, we have to go back and maintain what we've done in years past. And we completed 127 acres at a cost of almost $51,000 last year. Other priority weeds, we have our own staff and contractors helping us out with priority weeds. Oftentimes they are in grasslands again. This year we completed 80 acres of goat grass, 78 acres of yellow star. Of note, there's more we completed, but it's going to fall within the next FY reporting period. And then 62 acres of other priority weeds as well, and the various costs associated with that work. I'll let Sean take this slide here. He wanted to talk on this one.
Yeah, good afternoon, directors. Sean Horn, Watershed Resources Manager. This slide identifies what our BIFIP plan in the center column was for this second year of implementation, which was $2.2 million or so. We actually adopted a budget for our vegetation management this last year of $1.9 million, so slightly different than what the plan was outlining. And then we spent $1.7 million on vegetation management, as well as the compliance associated with that work. And Carl, in a later slide, is going to summarize why there was that difference between the adopted budget and what we actually. Back to you, Carl.
Thank you, Sean. Just a good overview of the various types of management actions or treatments that we conduct and their cost per acre. Maybe just to highlight, as I mentioned before, the new fuel break construction can often be the most expensive. You can see that cost per acre here is around $15,000 compared to some of them are more annual treatments of either weeds or annual grasses, which many of which are under $1,000. The photo to the right is of the defensible space work conducted around the Bontempi treatment plant. Okay, for a summary of work that we completed, again, this is, we were under our BIFIP year 2 targets by 230 acres. Again, this was due to a minor budget shortfall, as well as undercounting our broom maintenance and fuel breaks that we are also treating 4 fuels, and that is we didn't want to double count the same area. And then primary of which is we terminated a significant contract with one of our forestry contractors due to performance issues. I'll leave it at that. Fortunately, those unspent capital funds will get rolled over into FY22. Of note, we were over fine fuel maintenance work by about 14 acres, over roadside mowing about 18 acres. That may have made up for a small discrepancy or deficiency the previous year. We were under new fuel break construction by 7 acres. We intended to do more. Again, the budget constraints and then losing that contractor mentioned above did not help toward that effort. I mentioned before, but we completed 20 acres of another goat grazing trial along Shaver Grade and Deer Park. Looking ahead at additional goat grazing within some of our field breaks for next year. We're assessing that work now. We initiated forest path and pathogen work at select forestry sites. Again, looking specifically at soil-borne pathogens within our forestry units that we propose to conduct. We also submitted during the last FY multiple forestry and restoration grants. Go to the next slide, of which we have received 2. So we received a Coastal Conservancy grant for forest health, as well as a CAL FIRE grant for forest health. The Coastal Conservancy grant is around $888,000 for 2 years worth of forestry work. The CAL FIRE grant is $3.1 million for around 3 years worth of, again, forestry work. And you'll see the units that we're proposing to conduct that work, both for the Coastal Conservancy and for the CAL FIRE grant, in the image to the right. These are prioritized areas that tie into our existing fuel breaks and tie into our existing vegetation management work. So we're going to be building off of that. I mentioned before, we're working with, we've received a number of proposals from consultants for fuel modeling and treatment efficacy across the watershed. That is to assess the function and efficacy of our existing fuel breaks, and to provide us with direction on where we may conduct or put future fuel breaks or fuel treatments. Of note, as we look forward, our compliance costs will increase proportionally as our acres increase as we scale up for the BIFIP. Also, our inventories will also need to be scaled based on funding availability. And our regional forest health strategy work in conjunction with the Conservancy 1TAM staff is ongoing. And of note, one of their big accomplishments this year was to complete a county-wide fine scale vegetation map, much of which they built off of work that we had already completed or had in place, but now that level of vegetation analysis or GIS information is available countywide. Very interesting, very cool.
Yeah.
That's it for my slideshow. Does anyone have any questions?
I have a couple. On the 29 red flag days, how does that compare, if you have it off the top of your head, to like previous years? Is that, are we up or?
Certainly up. I don't have a specific number. I would almost say maybe double.
Oh, really? Oh.
Offhand. I don't have the exact number.
Okay. And second question, if you have any more about the goat project, I know the final results aren't in, but as I'm sure you know, we've gone through the process with goats in the past, and it's never gotten rave reviews. Does this look more positive than that? I mean, is there any hope for that?
We're looking at the effectiveness of goats. This last couple of trials we did, the first one was on young broom, and the second trial that we just did this year was on more mature broom. The initial results, especially from this year, are not necessarily promising. It is costly. There's a lot more front end work that needs to take place with our staff and avoidance. Specifically, goats will eat trees that we don't want, that we would normally maybe want to avoid, or brush that we might want to avoid. So we have to set up a fencing or avoidance fencing for the herds.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, they're not proving very effective. They don't seem to like broom very much. We're going to be trying them out one more time, at least on a fuel break. I'm looking at a couple of different fuel breaks now. One is Myrna above Deer Park School, and another is what we call the Myrna, or it's called the Warren Springs fuel break above Ross Reservoir.
Mhm. Okay, thank you.
Any other board comments? Okay, hearing none. Are there any public comments?
Director Schmidt, I believe Terry's having some technical difficulties, but I'm not seeing any hands raised on the Zoom. And I know this is just an informational item, so I think she's trying to relocate herself, but I think we're good here.
Okay, well, if there are no other comments, we'll move on to the next agenda item then, which is our watershed recreation plan update. And Sean, will you be taking this item?
Yeah, thank you, Director Schmidt. Sean Horn, Watershed Resources Manager. I'm going to pull up a presentation and then we'll give you an overview of where we are with our recreation management planning process. All right, so the district has initiated a watershed recreation planning effort, and I'm going to give you an overview of where we are in that process. To start this, I'm going to provide an overview of the watershed just to ground us in the geography that we're talking about. Very quickly overview the existing watershed plans we have and the biological monitoring that we conduct, just to put the recreation management planning within the context of other efforts that we have ongoing. And then talk about the initial scoping phase that we've moved through, and talk about the next steps with the recreation management planning process. So we're talking about when we are referring to our recreation management, we're talking about the 21,000 acres that Marin Water manages, and specifically that's visited by approximately 2 million visitors annually. Those visitors are coming through on 92 miles of roads and 59 miles of trails. Those roads are open to bicycles, hikers, and equestrians, while those hiking trails are limited to equestrians and hikers. We also have 60 miles of non-system social trails. So these are trails that have been developed over time through folks going to different parts of the watershed and establishing non-adopted trails. We also have 5 picnic areas within the watershed. And most people are coming up to visit the watershed because it is home to an array of flora and fauna that are special and unique to Marin County, and creates a very exceptional biodiversity that we have to consider as we steward these lands that we're managing. So the watershed plans that we have in place, one is the Mount Tam Roads and Trails Management Plan, which was adopted in 2005, which gives us the tools to maintain our roads and trails network. We also have the Lagunitas Creek Stewardship Plan that was established to mitigate for Kent Dam, and outlines the monitoring activities that we do downstream in the Lagunitas Creek watershed, as well as the restoration efforts. In 2013, the district conducted a watershed census survey to understand how the watershed is being used and the numbers of people that are visiting the watershed. And then we also contribute in collaboration with our other partners through the WNTAM initiative on the peak health, where we filter or feed our biological monitoring data from year to year to help understand what the health of the mountain is. And we work cross-jurisdictionally with the other land managers on that effort. And then in 2019, we adopted our Biodiversity, Fires, and Fuels Integrated Plan, which Carl just summarized. The biological monitoring and inventory activities that happen under those plans really help and support our understanding of the watershed. We do our foothill yellow-legged frog in Big Carson and Little Carson on an annual basis, our osprey monitoring at Kent Lake. Every third year, we do triannual bird monitoring to understand abundance patterns on the watershed. We completed a rare plant inventory, which is helping inform long-term rare plant monitoring. As part of our WNTAM effort, we're working on serpentine endemic occupancy surveys. We also collaborate on the early detection rapid response, looking at invasive species across boundaries. And then we conduct our northern spotted owl monitoring activities to inform operations of the watershed. In 2018, we completed a lichen inventory, and then under our Lagunitas Stewardship Plan, we carry out a number of salmon monitoring efforts, being adult, smolt, and juvenile salmon monitoring. And then in future years, we're looking at continuing with our forest pests and pathogens inventory, doing a more robust seeps and springs inventory of the watershed, looking at grasslands, and then also continuing to utilize this monitoring data to inform the peak health updates that are currently in the process. Now, the recreation management planning effort that we're currently underway on is not meant to replace any of the existing plans, but rather complement those plans to better support the district's operations. So what is recreation management and why are we looking at it? Recreation management is a proactive and adaptive process for setting up strategies and tools to achieve and maintain desired natural resource conditions as well as visitor experiences. So that's what we're thinking about. And as we move into it, we have to recognize and acknowledge that there are some constraints associated with legacy trails and roads that we're managing, sensitive physical and biological resources, the reality that we have various visitor goals and expectations with our visitors who are coming to the mountain. There's longstanding conversations around different modes of use and what should and should not be allowed on the watershed. There's limitations to financial and staff resources on what can be completed and carried out. And there's also advancement of disruptive advancements, app-based trail guides, new modes, and social media, which have really influenced and changed the patterns of use on the watershed. And then there's some overarching challenges like climate change, drought, and wildfire that we need to consider as we move through these planning processes. So a visitor management framework that was presented in our initial scoping phase really provides kind of a guide for how we're moving through this process. And the top two bullets are where we've been to date, where we've been working with stakeholders and community members to think about why and what is the purpose of a recreation management plan. And then also to start to develop and define what those desired conditions are. And we'll continue with this as we move through the planning process, but we have had initial conversations with stakeholders on these two subjects. Now, as we move on with our planning process, we'll start to identify management strategies or the how, as well as the implement, monitor, and evaluate in the doing to think about how we can make adjustments and create really a living document that helps us manage recreation on the watershed. So just to summarize the initial scoping phase that we've gone through to date, we partnered with the Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy to facilitate 2 public scoping meetings. We outreached to 57 community groups to encourage participation in those meetings. We had 227 community members attend. At the May 21st meeting, we had guest speakers. We had 4 presentations, which I'll briefly summarize in the next couple of slides to really lay some foundational concepts and language around recreation planning. And then at the June 25th, we facilitated multiple breakout sessions to really facilitate community input and discussion around recreation. And then out of that process, we've developed a summary memo, which is attached to the staff report today. So our first presentation was from Dewey Livingston from the A&T Kent California Room Library, Marin County Library. He provided an overview of the history of Mount Tamalpais watershed and really talked about the changes in human use on Mount Tam from Native Americans through the development of railroads to modern recreation. He talked about the formation of the water district as a water provider, and then changes in the patterns of use that occurred over time and how those linked up to the national recreation movement, as well as the evolution of bicycles. Then we invited Dr. Ashley D'Antonio, who's an assistant professor of nature-based recreation management from Oregon State University. And she spoke about balancing natural resource protection with recreation, really giving everyone an understanding of what recreation planning is, what a recreation plan entails and the components of it, and then how you can develop these plans to balance natural resource protection with recreation and different visitor goals in mind. We looked at a couple different recreation management plans that she had worked on, and we discussed what they entailed. And really, this bottom graphic defines kind of what the process entails, really looking at those desired conditions and the outcomes that you want to achieve, recognizing that those are bound by the land management agencies, laws, missions, and policies that exist, and then the reality that there's no universal framework for planning around recreation management, and that these can take shape based on kind of the locale and the geography that you're working within. Next, we had a presentation from Kate Bickert from Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy, who worked on the Golden Gate National Recreation Area's Trails Forever program. And she really spoke about how you can develop a plan that looks at access while incorporating restoration and stewardship initiatives, and how you can develop community engagement and support through those processes, and gave some really great examples of how you can protect sensitive resources through effective planning. Then we had a presentation from Jose Gonzalez from Avarna Consulting, who talked about diversity, equity, inclusion in the outdoors, really discussed the philosophical and legal foundations that have excluded some people from public lands in the past and how this influenced our socio-cultural foundations, and helped us understand that when we're moving through these planning processes, we need to think about how to engage a diverse audience in the planning process, to think about the barriers that exist for them and how we can help break those down to encourage open access to these public lands. So meeting 2, we really focused on getting community input and allowing for discussion among the stakeholders and capturing that discussion to inform the request for proposals that we've developed. So we had two overarching questions and we dealt with these in different breakout rooms. The first was, why do you think a recreation plan is needed? What do you want to see as part of this recreation and stewardship planning process? And then the second one was around those foundational elements of desired conditions. So what values are central to future conditions and how do we align around a set of desired conditions? So really helping the community think about what do we want to achieve in the future and how do we maintain that? The overarching themes that came out of this process was there was a lot of interest in seeing a data-driven decision-making effort built into this planning process. They wanted to see ongoing public engagement throughout the entire process. There was discussion around inclusivity, and this kind of took two different threads, one being around equitable access. Some user groups thought that they should have more access to different types of trails, while there was also discussion around how to engage diverse user groups or different groups that have been left out of the planning process in the past, perhaps, and how we could better connect with them. Then there was kind of a core foundational theme among all of our stakeholders, who was how to balance conservation with recreation and the different strategies that could be developed to help that. There was thought and discussion around visitor management and how to spread users out and separate types of use, and then also thinking about stewardship as a foundation to the plan. So where are we in this planning process and what does the request for proposals entail? So we've moved through this initial scoping phase. We've developed a request for proposal based on the input that we received in that initial phase. And now we're moving to advance this planning effort. And our first step will really be to develop a public engagement plan with the consultant that we bring on. And then we'll be moving into developing that recreation management plan. So the request for proposals that's also attached to the staff report today outlines kind of the different tasks that we would have this consultant come on board to assist the district with. The first is really just project administration or management that comes with all contracts. The second component is a literature review, really having this consultant go out and look at what other land management and water districts specifically are doing to protect water supply, biodiversity, and different visitor goals, and then come back and develop some recommendations for Marin to consider and work with our stakeholders to develop. The Watershed Recreation Management Plan itself would entail a community engagement plan and process where we'd engage our stakeholders to think through how we develop this, thinking through the visitor information that we have, the signs, the kiosks, and how we can develop better information to support access, and then thinking about the existing partnerships and outreach strategies that we need to develop in order to influence recreational culture. And then thinking about visitor management strategies. That might be directional trails, shifting use of certain areas, things like that that might be able to influence some of the perceived and experienced conflicts that we've had on the watershed. And then recreational facility assessments is really looking deeply at kind of the trails that we have, the roads that we have, the picnic areas, water fountains, sanitation facilities, and thinking about how we can better manage or improve those. And then at the end of this is developing management actions and operational procedures that we can carry out, as well as an adaptive management plan and process built into this, really to establish a living document here. So the preliminary schedule is to move forward with a request for proposals after this meeting, get proposals from consultants, and then hopefully issue a notice to proceed in December. We'd be moving forward with our literature review initially to give us some justification on the direction that we're taking, and then start to develop that recreation management plan. And at the end of this, we'd develop an environmental review memo, really pointing to how we would complete compliance if needed on the different elements of the plan. So next steps is we'd be soliciting proposals from consultants. The due date tentatively is scheduled for November 19th. We'd be conducting interviews in December and then moving forward initially with developing that public engagement plan and a strategy for ensuring that we're being inclusive and thoughtful in how we move forward with this effort. And then having a kickoff, likely some presentation to the Watershed Committee at a future meeting to really establish kind of the process that we're moving forward with and how we'll engage our stakeholders. So with that, I'll open it up to comments and take any questions you might have.
I have a couple of questions. One of my concerns really has always been, I'll call it overuse of the watershed. The watershed presents a very big chunk of the district's annual budget, just managing it. And too many people are damaging to the watershed. And yet many groups measure success in watershed management by saying, this is how many people we got up, or 2 million people is like a good thing. do we have any focus in our recreational plan that is that's focused on limitations? And I don't necessarily mean one group versus another group. I mean general limitations on the watershed, how it should be used, how much it should be used, how many people we want to participate in the watershed, and et cetera. Those sorts of questions, I guess.
Yeah, thank you. In the RFP that we've developed, there's a visitor management task. So, and that's starting to think about, are there trails that are being overused, and should we consider permit systems? Should we consider registration for different types of use? Should we consider different variations to our parking establishments? So there is a consideration for how we protect certain areas and how we do that through different management tools.
Any other board comments? Okay, Terry, you want to see if there are any public comments?
Yeah, we have several. The first one is the first two, Nona Dennis and then Roger Roberts, please, in that order. Miss Dennis. Miss Nona Dennis, please. Okay, I'll come back to her later. Roger Roberts.
I want to compliment Jack Gibson for his commentary. There is an issue of carrying capacity, not only for the watershed, but for the whole Mount Tam complex of state parks and open space of the county and GGNRA. So there needs to be active cooperation and coordination with MMWD's recreation management plan and those of these other agencies. And I'm not quite sure how you're going to accomplish that because we have overuse throughout the district and as well as with other land management agencies. So there's an issue of carrying capacity, and I think that needs to be addressed jointly as part of the recreation management plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Miss Nona Dennis, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, good. Okay.
You've now muted yourself, Nona.
Miss Dennis. We'll come back to Miss Dennis again. Miss Sheraton. Oh, there's Miss Dennis. Okay, Miss
You
Dennis.
have me now?
I got you now.
Okay, sorry, I'm on my phone. Yeah, I want to say I think you're really on the right track in the way you're approaching this plan. I like Jack Gibson's comment because I have not seen any particular component in the RFP or the scope of work that suggests this pursuit of what a carrying capacity is. Very, very elusive concept. But what I do think is important is that you look at the broad spread of uses. When I looked at how the watershed is used, we tend to think of it in like three groups: people on foot, people on a bike, and people on a horse. And that is absolutely not, I think, what you're looking for. You have people who are coming to fish. You have people who are coming to picnic. We have lots of people who come to Lagunitas just to enjoy being there, short walks, and so forth. And I commend the scope of work for the consultant. We're going to follow it very closely and hope that it continues to be not responsive to single voices, but rather to voices that are looking at the broad use and enjoyment of the watershed that it's had over the years. Keeping in mind Jack's precaution, which is always that people grow in their uses and enjoyment. Nature doesn't grow, it's finite. The watershed is what it is. It's going to remain what it is, even as the population grows and demands grow. So keep that in mind. Nature is finite, people are not. So we need to be very, very concerned about that imbalance. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker, pardon me, the next speaker I have is 8800.
Hi, yes. You can hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. Nancy Okada, thank you for taking public comment. And I agree with Jack's comments and Roger's and Nona's as well. The carrying capacity really needs to be determined, and then we need to work to, conserve the natural area based upon what the carrying capacity is. And I'm just wondering if, in fact, any discussion was done or any comments were made during these sessions about electric bikes and mountain bike usage. And, especially with electric bikes and the fact that they can just go anywhere, and because of the various categories of electric bikes, which makes them either a motorbike, which they really are all motorbikes, or not under the DMV classification. I was thinking that maybe if you had some sort of a way to monitor electric and mountain bike usage that comes into the area by possibly giving them a little GPS monitor, set up a kiosk at various locations, and make sure that the bicyclists have to check in with you, whether they're mountain bikes or electric bikes, get a little GPS monitor so that you know where they're going. It would probably take some, time and figuring out, but the sophistication now of that kind of electronic monitoring is amazing. And right now, the hikers are being scared off the paths. They're being run over. The environmental damage of rogue bikers going everywhere really needs to be addressed. And I know that in some parts of the state they're using cameras to surveil, but I don't think that's necessary, hopefully. As well as I was wondering also what's going on with the mountain bikers biking in the middle of the night, the night riders that are also crisscrossing the district. I know you need more rangers, and they're doing a great job, but they're destroying the bikers are destroying the habitat. So thank you very much.
Thank you. The next speaker, Bill Keane, please.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Oh, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bill Keane from Fairfax, California. I really want to applaud you all for taking this step. I think it's time well spent, and it's been needed for quite some time now. Just to address some issues that have come up today, I think the time is now to figure out how to balance the uses on the watershed. I think everybody can have a place, whether they're bikers, hikers, equestrians, or those wanting to picnic or enjoy the lakes for just its nature. We all love the nature out there. I would just point out that looking at ways to separate use, I think might be the way to go here. I did my master's thesis on trail use conflict when I was at San Francisco State in the late 90s. And one of the conclusions that came out of my study was the need to separate use and build trails that are separating folks who are hiking and folks who are mountain biking. I think that would address a lot of the concerns that are raised by just the several speakers here who just spoke on bikes. If there's trails for bikes to ride, then they don't need to ride trails that hikers are on. So I think just knowing that you can share the trails, that there can be both and still protect the environment as well, I think is some way in which we need to look. As for the public process, I think it's important that we find solutions that meet the most interests in the room. And I would include the environment in that. I think the environment doesn't have a voice, but we certainly need to make sure we're protecting that. But more importantly, because conflict has been associated with these trails, finding ways to get people into the same room. So whoever consultant that you hire should be skilled at bringing these various user groups together and help them come to agreements and support one another in having the kind of use that they want on the mountain that meets their needs. And if we do that, there's 22,000 acres in this watershed. There's plenty of area for everyone to enjoy and have uses that meet their need and don't tread on others. And I think if you hold people accountable at the end of the day, like if we're making agreements and people sit in a room and find solutions, that, we hold people accountable after the fact. Like, we don't have people sit down and figure out these solutions and then later on backtrack from things they've agreed to. I think that's one of the things that could really hold us back. Again, I just want to say thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it and look forward to participating and seeing some solutions that benefit the environment and then also the users that are out there. Thank you.
Thank you. The next two speakers I have are, excuse me, from the Marin Conservation League and Nathan Cohen. Hello?
Hello.
Yes,
that-
hi.
It's Larry Minikis. That might be me.
Okay.
I'm in on the wrong account, but that's okay.
Okay.
First to the last speaker, there's an assumption that there's not enough places to ride. There are enough places to ride on the mountain. We do not require more trails. We have plenty of trails in Marin. You are never, ever, ever going to make those people happy that want more trails, no matter how many trails we build. And we have been building trails these last couple of decades. We hear constantly the same thing. There's not enough places to ride. We need more trails. There's plenty of room for all of us. I want to say that that is not correct. The second thing I want to talk about, and the last speaker did touch on it, and I want to thank Roger, I want to thank Sean, I want to thank Jack and Nona. And we're getting a little too human-based. We have to be considering the impact on wildlife with carrying capacity. And we have to be taking a look at that and monitoring that. We have several hundred species on this mountain, and I've talked about this for over a decade, the impact on wildlife. And I think that is as important as a recreational plan. And thank you for your time.
Thank you. The next speaker, Laura Sheraton, please.
Hi, thank you very much. I know you guys have a hard job ahead of you. I want to just echo exactly what was said by Larry Minikis, Nona Dennis, and Roger Roberts. And Nancy Okada. I too am very concerned that wildlife isn't being elevated, and that is one of the district's responsibilities, is to maintain, especially in this time of losing species in the sixth extinction. We have a much heavier lift than we've ever had, but we need to protect them first and foremost before any recreation. The other thing that I want to address is the 2012-2013 Mount Tam survey of users, I believe at this point would be considered obsolete. There's been a huge increase in use, and even more so since the pandemic. The communities around the trailheads, maybe I missed that in the talk, but I want to add that there are impacted communities that need to be brought into this discussion, and I don't hear that happening. As far as electric bikes go, almost every time I go out, there's electric bikes, and some of them are being ridden by young kids who wouldn't be able to have a driver's license, and they're riding all over the berms and the eyebrows and tearing them apart. And they're also riding them on single track trails. And my experience over the 45 years that I've been hiking in the watershed is that I now have a basic fear every time I go out, because as Larry said, there are people who will never obey the rules, and there are people who will always take the quickest route down the mountain, even if it's illegal, and they might take out some hikers. So I want you to consider, and I've mentioned this several times before, that older people aren't moving as fast as they used to. There's a lot of us that still love and enjoy the mountain, and we consider ourselves caretakers of it. And we're also the eyes on the ground that are going to let you know when there are issues that you need to address. Thanks.
Thank you. I need to state for the record that I'm again having some IT issues. I can't see any of our speakers for public comment, and unfortunately I can't make anyone a co-host. So I don't know if this is the time that Vice Chair Schmidt, if you want to go ahead and take the comments from the board. But for those of you, I'm very sorry. I can't get a hold of you. If you are trying to leave a public comment to please, you can always send an email to our board comment@marinwater.com, and they definitely get it, as well as to their work email.
This is Nathan Cohen. I think you called my name earlier.
Oh, thank God. Okay, so yes, yes, I did call you earlier, and I didn't know what happened to you because my computer went kaput. So if you're okay, Director Schmidt, with listen and chair, okay.
Anybody we can fit in. Let's.
All right, thank you. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Yeah, I was wondering if we could put a GPS tag on every hiker that goes into the park. I'm sorry to, be jokey, but I just want to let that sink in how, ridiculous tracking people in that kind of fashion is. And I trust that that's not something that, would ever really be seriously considered to track any user group in that way. It sounds like I totally agree that the resources need a voice. But, there's a lot of jumping to conclusions around who impacts what and why people do what they do. The fact of the matter is that like people have said, if there's a way that they can recreate in a way that satisfies them and is fun, you're going to have a lot more compliance. So bringing in these user groups, being more inclusive, that is going to, so that's going to create a lot better environment than, if people are continued to kind of be held back. To the comments about how mountain bikers don't or have plenty of trails, like, there's 0 single track that mountain bikers can ride. And if you believe that humans haven't been impacting the environment, you're being delusional. It is a resource, but it's a resource that we have to work with, whether we admit it or not. People have been affecting the environment for thousands of years, and we have to work smartly and not, just ignore it and pretend like, one group is okay and another isn't, and so on and so forth. Yeah, again, commend the effort. It seems like the foundation of the planning process is going really nicely, and I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Terry, I can see the list. You want me just to read them off?
I don't know that anyone is able, Director Russell, to allow the speakers to speak other than the host, and that is Terry.
Yeah.
I see. So they
Right.
can't,
So otherwise
they
we
can't talk
would.
unless they're recognized, huh?
Correct.
Yeah, I'm
in
so
this
sorry.
format. So
Somebody else.
unfortunately,
Let's get this problem addressed, Terry, because you've been
Yes.
having this problem for months now.
Right, yeah,
So-
no, I've been trying my best, and I don't know, I went from my other laptop and I'm using another laptop now, so I don't know what the deal is, but yes, definitely I will look into it further.
Well, I find the access on a phone is fine. It's a little hard to see, but it's doable. So you could try that and see what happens.
Well, if I do it now, the thing is, let me try. Well,
Just leave them both set up.
yeah.
There's only a half a dozen more that wish to speak. So if we can
Wish
figure
to
out a
speak.
way.
Okay, well, could we
Or-
do a mini pause while, like a mini break, if that's okay?
Of course.
yeah, do you want to go ahead and try and go back to the other system, Terry? And
Yeah,
okay.
that would be great, thank you.
We'll give you a minute. So we're going to take a couple of minutes to see if we can get our technical issues worked out so we can allow the rest of the speakers an opportunity to speak in person. We'll see if we can accommodate that.
Okay, maybe Molly, I'll take a moment here because I can be
Please.
heard. I was going to provide comments, and I'll just buy Terry some time to hopefully solve our technical problems. Just to say some of my own comments, which, you know, there's a lot of pressure on this recreation management plan, and it couldn't come at a better time, but also couldn't come at a worse time, in the sense that we are experiencing recreational pressures unlike we've ever seen before in a changing environment, not just the climate, but dealing with a pandemic and other things that are just making this a really complicated endeavor, but one that we really need to go through. And I'm really appreciative of all the work that's been done by staff and people who've participated. And it's going to take a lot of collaboration and creativity, and I hope constructive approaches and conversations among different interests to get to a plan that people are happy with. Some overarching thoughts are that we really do need to make sure that our recreation management plan highlights synergies with our other land use management agencies that border our properties, because those boundaries are not really boundaries in many respects. That's where recreation comes into our watershed and goes out of our watersheds that we manage. So I think that the cost savings, the co-management benefits, I think are really important for us to make sure we get right. I want to make sure that we're also really focusing on recreational access for all members of our community, including our low-income communities, wherein these recreational resources can be sort of the only things that the only recreational resources that can be accessed for without driving far out of the area. So it makes it really important for, I think, some parts of our community that may not be able to participate on a call in the middle of the day or otherwise. I want to acknowledge that the recreation that we are trying to manage needs to be subservient to our first and foremost goal, which is water supply reliability and security for all of our communities that need us to provide water, and that is our primary charge. Protecting our natural resources, of course, is also a really high priority, especially for listed species, and we need to get that right. And the issues of carrying capacity and differential impacts upon different species and different communities of plants and the like need to be considered, I think, and I know they are part of the plan, but we do need to get that right. The last thing I want to just highlight is what's probably obvious to many folks who have been part of this process for a long time, which is we've got to figure out how to get the bike recreational access issue resolved. And I doubt that we're ever going to make everybody happy, but I know that this is an issue that's been going on for so long. And if this plan doesn't go substantially in the direction of trying to reduce the stress and the conflict and to try to address the needs that everybody is talking about, both for and against and everything in between around bike access, including e-bikes, we'll just be talking about this again and again for years and years. And I would be disappointed if we don't make substantial progress towards resolving that. And I hope that to the extent that when we select a consultant in our scope of work, which I think looks good, if it's not explicitly stated, and I wonder whether it should actually just specifically say, and particularly highlighting resolving this issue and looking for a consultant that has some expertise, hopefully a background in resolving some similar, if not the same, kind of recreational land use management conflict. I just think it is such a complex issue that has defied resolution for years that a consultant that we do select, I would really like to see that they have a background in trying to address this issue or something similar.
I have a comment, Monty.
Yes.
It seems to me we have the perfect opportunity here to make this a true pay-as-you-go situation. With 2 million visitors, I think we need to take a hard look at the National Park Service model that everyone pays to enter. And you know, with accommodations for those who are less able to pay, we can deal with that issue. I couldn't really tell. I think the gentleman was joking about the RFID tag, but actually it makes a lot of sense if you think about it. And not from a identification of who the person is, but for having a pass to another water district. And there are 13 entrances. You know, I think 13 structures could be built if they needed to be. Or we could say, we're going to close those entrances and you have to come through these entrances. So I think this is an opportunity. I mean, with 2 million people, you know, if we had even a $10 contribution, and even if it was voluntary, let's say half of the people paid, you know, we have $10 million, which would more than pay for the cost of managing the watershed and would give us the opportunity to improve things in the manners that people are proposing. Once you have the cash, life's easy. So I think it's something that needs to be added to that scope of work, is some way of paying for all of this that doesn't burden the water district, but burdens the users. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Terry, are you able to now identify other speakers?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, in this order, I have Andrew Levine, then Jeff Guild, and Mike D. Go ahead, sir, Andrew Levine.
Hello, and thank you. So my name is Andrew Levine. I'm a resident of Mill Valley. Mostly just responding to a few things that I heard. One, I agree with the comments around carrying capacity is a concern, but the real issue there is not that there's too many folks on the watershed, it's that we historically haven't managed it. We have a bunch of trails. We don't have a managed system. When you see that you have more social trails than you do system trails, that's telling you something. So I agree very much with Mr. Schmidt and his comment that we should have somebody who's done this well somewhere else. We can come up with a bunch of wild ideas here about putting scarlet letters on people or devices or whatever, but let's look around the world or even around the Bay Area and see what entities have done this successfully. And that I agree wholeheartedly that the goal is, let's find a way to reduce conflict. We all want to preserve the water, the watershed, the flora, the fauna. I think we're all in agreement there. So I appreciate the opportunity to be part of this process, but kind of exclusionary policies so that the rich white folks can wander around the watershed, but we're not letting anybody else in under the name of you know, environmental preservation or something, I think is not appropriate. There are plenty of folks who love this watershed, want to protect it, and might not be doing the things that you do when they're there, and they might not be like you, but that doesn't mean they don't have the right nor respect it and honor it just as much as you. So I think let's not exclude people, let's include people and figure out a way to make this work for everybody. So thanks again for letting me participate in this process.
Thank you. Mr. Guild, please.
Yeah, hi. This is Jeff Guild. I live in Fairfax. I want to commend Monty on his view as far as being inclusionary and thinking about really trying to accommodate the users of the watershed, the diversity of the users of the watershed. This whole recreation planning process has been very inclusive. The past couple meetings we've had, there's been a very positive attitude and collaborative attitude for the folks that have participated in it. And I hope we can continue that with a consultant that has a broad base and bringing together user groups. I'm kind of appalled by the amount of the folks who have come out of the woodwork here, who have gone kind of contrary to this inclusionary and thoughtful process, which and that process, there's been consensus on one thing up to now, or at least the main thing is that you need to balance the needs of the users with nature, and the primary use of the watershed, which is providing water to the folks in Marin. But code words like carrying capacity and even nature, just playing the nature card and putting those issues at odds with the groups who don't have adequate access currently to the watershed. I would just really encourage folks to participate in the process, be open that not everybody recreates in the watershed the same way that you might. They might not look like you do. And just please refrain from playing carrying capacity and nature as a card in dividing the interests where we can find common ground. I'm hopeful that that's what we can do through this process, and I'm hopeful that we can leave the vitriolic posturing that I've heard in the beginning of this meeting out of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike D, then Scott. Go ahead,
Cool.
Mike.
Thank you. My name is Mike DeFeo from San Anselmo. First of all, as everyone else is saying, commend you all for running a really good process here. I'm extremely excited to actually be participating in it, which actually leads me to my first point. This is my first time participating in one of these meetings, and I've been blown away at how informative it is and just like kind of fun it is to be involved in what the watershed is working on. I view participation in the watershed as like kind of a core part of my life at this point. So I would love to continue to participate. My call to action here is to please consider moving these meetings to times that are more accessible for folks that do have full-time jobs, that unlike, some of us that do work from our computers can't just jump off and jump on a Zoom call. We speak a lot about equity and serving low-income communities, and I commend you, Monty, for bringing that up. But these are the folks who in particular are going to be underrepresented in these conversations. So all this is to say, like, if we could somehow make these meetings more accessible, I think the whole recreation planning process would achieve that goal more easily of being more inclusive. So thank you all.
Thank you. Scott?
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. Thank you so much for allowing the public participation in this process. I really appreciate that we're allowed to do this input. And I think that a lot of the things said here have been some really good comments, including balancing the protection of the natural spaces with the needs of the user groups, and really making sure that we include multiple user groups and multiple demographic groups in our thoughts of amending or creating a new recreation plan. And some of the thoughts that were brought up about addressing number of users at the park, in the watershed area, thoughts, making sure that as we're developing plans to handle the amount of folks that come into these places, really thinking about, where the user groups are actually accessing these spaces, and that there are, a large number of trails and roads and pathways in the system that aren't very heavily utilized, so that the numbers seem high but there's repeat users as well as spreading out among the users in the watershed area. And so making sure that when we are addressing any future capacity, thoughts of any capacity on the system, thinking that, well, we have this large watershed area with these multiple areas to go, and maybe a lot of them are underutilized, but some of them are maybe overutilized, and making sure that as we're accounting for in a plan that includes, all of our user groups, that, we take that into account before we just consider penalizing everyone based on the, what a raw number of users look like. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. This is Tom Boss with Marin County Bicycle Coalition. And yeah, you guys can hear me all?
Loud and clear.
Great. First of all, I just want to commend the staff on doing a really excellent job, and all the people that helped with the scoping process. They really captured all of the different perspectives that were said through those earlier meetings, and the same goes for what we're hearing today here in the comments. One of the key findings was that everybody agreed that they want to have access to the mountain without compromise to the resource value. So that was really good to see. There was also an awareness that we need to do a better job at providing access for our underserved communities and people that don't have their personal means of transportation. So, and the RFP, I've heard a lot of different comments and suggestions, and if you read the RFP, everything that's been said here today is captured in the scope of work for this consultant group that will put together this plan. Looking at different ways to pay for things, looking at the different impacts, limiting use, moving use around. And that leads me to one of the things I think there's a concern that if you have a recreation plan means there's going to be expansion of use. And I don't see it that way. I think there's already a lot of use, and what this plan will do is we'll better manage and distribute that use, and make sure that that it's safe for everybody and that it's low impact to the environment. So anyway, I just really think that we've got a good outline here for a very productive process to begin, and I support it fully. Thank you.
You're on mute, Terry.
Thank you. Mr. Roger Roberts?
I have no comment at this point. I don't know why you're calling me.
Okay. All right. I have no further comments.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. That brings us to the end of our agenda. This is an informational item, so there's no decision to be made here. And if there's nothing else, I think we're done for today. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time during the day to show up and provide comments. And thank you to the staff for all the hard work to prepare.
And thank you, Monty. You did a great job.
Yep, good job, Monty.
Thank you.